Hey guys, OG Albina here, and today I will be showing you my attempt at a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Black 2 using only Steel types. If you've ever played Pokemon and are familiar with the Steel type, you know how great they can be defensively. On top of their great average base defensive stats, in Generation 5 Steel types pack a total of 11 resistances. As great as Steel types are, they do have some common weaknesses to strong offensive typings in ground, fighting, and fire, so we do have some scary fights ahead of us in Clay and Marshall. Plus, Steel types are pretty few and far in between, especially in the early game, so we don't really have a lot of wiggle room. If you've never seen a hardcore Nuzlocke and aren't familiar with the rules, check out the description below. If you guys enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate it if you guys would both like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really does help me out a ton. And if you want to watch these runs live, go down to the description below and follow me on Twitch. Alright, let's jump into it. We start off by sitting through some early game dialogue and get to pick our starter. Now, we obviously don't get to use this starter, but I picked Snivy so that a rival will eventually have Emboar, making this run just a bit harder for us down the line. With that, we can go get our actual starter in Riolu at Flockacy Ranch. Now, Riolu isn't a Steel type yet, but it will be once it evolves into Lucario. Plus, Riolu is a friendship evolution. Because of this, we can max out his happiness and get Lucario pretty much immediately. Now, I won't lie, Lucario makes this early game a cakewalk. Its base stats are great and it has a great defensive typing. This, in conjunction with the first 3 gym typings being resistances of Steel, we should honestly be set. After obtaining Lucario, we beat up our rival and we're able to take on Cheren and the first gym. All we have to do is spam Quick Attack on his Patrat as well as his Lillipup, grabbing ourselves a pretty easy first badge. After this, we get the TM for Workup as well as Return, which are both amazing. Workup gives us a great way to boost our attacking stats for sweeping potential, and Return gives me a high base power move to hit a ton of Pokemon neutrally, especially with Lucario's maxed out happiness. Next up is Burbank City, where we can pick up our next encounter at the Burbank Complex in Magnemite, who is going to be an incredible asset this run. A strong defensive Steel, a way to hit bulky water types, and momentum grabbing and Volt Switch. It'll be really solid for this run. Mag will have to wait in the back for this gym though, because this is the Lucario show. We can use our newly acquired TMs from Cheren and Bianca and set up all over Roxy's coughing that can't really touch us. From here, it's just a few returns and boom, second baggage and a very useless Venoshock TM. After sitting through Pokestar Studios, insert Pokestar Studios bad joke here, and we can head to the next big city in Castelia, which also has our next encounter and gym. However, this will be our last encounter until after Clay, so we have to be extra careful until then. Said encounter is a Drillbur and an eventual Excadrill, another amazing encounter. I'm sensing a theme here. I grab the leftovers and Eviolite in the shooters and cities respectively, and then get ready to take on our next gym. Another easy one, admittedly. This gym was more of the same. Berg Swadloon can't touch Lucario at all, so I set to +6 while my leftovers kept me healthy. From here, I OHKO every one of his team members minus Sturdy Dwevil, which takes a few hits after a potion. Like I said, this is the Lucario show. I take on Colors for the first time on my way to Nimbasa City, but it was pretty easy as his team's packed full of Steel types, so I won't go over it in detail here. From here on out, I'll only be going over Plasma or rival fights that are difficult or interesting. And believe me, some of the Hue fights are absolutely terrifying. While grinding, Magnemite evolved into Magneton, which will be a huge boost for the upcoming gym, especially for Amolka. Elisa is the first gym leader I actually have to put thought into, and I think they came up with a pretty decent plan. Let's see how it goes. I lead with, you guessed it, Lucario. Turn 1, I go for a workup as Amolka Volt switches out into Substrika. For some reason, the Substrika goes for a 4 times resisted pursuit instead of a flame charge, allowing me to just throw off a huge +1 bone rush. We grab a clean OHKO on 3 hits. Next up is Flaffy, which also drops to a bone rush. Last up is Amolka, and to not risk a Volt Switch crit, I go into Magneton and finish it off with a couple of Thunder Shocks. And boom, Elisa down. Elisa was a great warm-up, but now it's time for our toughest battle this whole run. Freaking Clay and his ground types. Huge shout out to my buddy Craft for helping me theory craft a plan for this gym in stream. Hey, follow me on Twitch so I don't lose these runs, please. Thanks. Before we take on the Clay, I have to grab a few important items. The Expert Belt and especially the Air Balloon, which will be key to our upcoming strategy. This will also be the first gym where Lucario takes a backseat. It's time for our newest member Excadrill to show why it's so freaking good. The plan was simple. We lead off with Air Balloon Excadrill to absorb and intimidate from Krokorok. However, we'll be holding an air balloon, allowing us to dodge any ground move until we're hit by another type of move and have it popped. We will then take this opportunity to switch into Magneton to either take a resisted Crunch or Torment. Then, knowing a Bulldoze is coming out, we can pivot right back out into Excadrill, avoiding a Bulldoze. With our attack at neutral, I feel comfortable setting up a Hone Claws as the Krokorok torments us. We can then OHKO it with an Iron Head, allowing us to level up to level 34, which is extremely important. Since we still have our Air Balloon, we can pretty comfortably 2-hit KO this incoming Sandslash as it pops our Air Balloon with a Crush Claw. Lastly is Clay's own Excadrill. Since we leveled up, we just actually barely outspeed his drill and could take it out with a +1 dig. Yep, we just beat Mono Ground with our 3 Steel types with no deaths. I'm pretty darn proud of how that one turned out. From here, we can grab a few TMs by grinding in the PWT, as well as the Rocky Helmet, and then head towards the 6th gym. However, before this, our team gets a few new members. We can catch an Aeron in Mistralton Cave and a Clink in Chargestone Cave. We're also able to evolve Magneton in Chargestone Cave. Speaking of Magnezone, we have a Flying type gym next. I'm sure you know how this goes down. A couple electric moves later and we have 6 whole gyms done. After this, we can grab our 6th team member in Skarmory outside of Reversal Mountain. And hallelujah, I have a ground immunity. Not only this, but I also have a Pokemon neutral to fighting now. Skarmory was a huge add to this team. On our way to fight Drapion for our 7th badge, we have our first difficult rival fight versus Hugh. His Unfez and Simipour aren't a huge issue, but man oh man, Emboar sure is. I basically have to ensure that I have a Pokemon in that's both faster and can OHKO it when it gets sent in. My plan for this is leading Lucario and setting up a Swords Dance. After this, I can OHKO the Unfezant with a +2 Ice Punch. Next comes in the dreaded Emboar, but thankfully we're prepared. A +2 Expert Belt boosted Bone Rush takes it out with ease. Last up is Simipour, and I'm not convinced I'll kill, so I'll pivot right back out into Magnezone and finish it off. While on our way to Opelucid, we have to cross the village bridge and do a mandatory fight versus Gentleman Stonewall, who happens to be on a 999 win streak. I can see why, as he is a Durant, strong, but not a problem for Mono Steel, and a freaking Lucario. I protect him with my Skarmory to scout the Lucario to see what it wants to go for and get absolutely punished as it Swords Dances in my freaking face. Worst case scenario. I'm 100% forced to pick a sack here, and unfortunately I see Clink as my least valuable member and sack it off. RIP buddy, you did absolutely nothing this run. I can then go into my own Lucario and pick it off, avenging our first death. Thankfully, we can add a new member right after this and right before the next gym in Pawnyard. She won't evolve until after the 8th gym, but when she does, we add another powerhouse to the team. Alrighty, 7th gym time. Drapion leads off with a pretty decently bulky Druddigon. On top of its great natural bulk, it has access to Revenge. This is a fighting type move that does double damage if we hit it first, so we have to Swords Dance turn 1 with Lucario to ensure we can OHKO with an Ice Punch afterwards. Next up is Flygon, and despite me feeling like I should outspeed this, I decided it wasn't worth the risk, so I pivot out into Skarmory to aptly 1v1 it with Iron Heads. Lastly is Haxorus, and since we don't have access to Roost yet on Skarmory, it's pretty low, so I pivot out into my Rocky Helmet holding Aggron. I can take this thing on if it Dragon Dances, and if it Dragon Tails, it takes a chunk from the Rocky Helmet. It does end up Dragon Tailing me into my Lucario, and since I chew any hit from this, I throw off another Ice Punch, which I actually end up getting a freeze with. This allows me to take it out the next turn with another. The Lucario show continues. After we beat up Team Plasma for freezing the city over with Kyurem, it's time to take on Marlin and his water types. You'd think this fight would be as easy as Skylar with Magnezone, but it's a bit more tricky. He leads off with his sturdy shell-smashing Caracosta, which is pretty darn terrifying. Turn 1 I throw off a Discharge, bring it down to a sturdy, and trying to bait a para, which I unfortunately don't get as he actually scalds and get a burn. This actually kinda sucks as it nullifies my leftovers recovery. I know Marlin will heal the next turn, so I take this opportunity to Volt Switch out and preserve health on Magnezone, bringing the Caracosta down to sturdy once again. I then go into Lucario and pick it off with a Thunder Punch. Next up is Wailord, which I set up a Swords Dance on, as for some reason it throws off an Amnesia. The next turn I KO with another T-Punch. Last up is Jellicent, and a +2 Thunder Punch is enough to take it out as well. Now I know that looked easy, but it could have been a lot tougher if the Caracosta elected to Shell Smash instead of just Scald. Now all we have left is Kyurem Black, Ghetsis, and then the Elite Four. We sit through the Kyurem vs Zekrom cutscene, which actually aged surprisingly well, at least in my eyes. I remember thinking this was incredibly dope as the games originally dropped, so I'm glad to see it stood the test of time. Kyurem Black itself is actually pretty easy. A ton of our members could take it out as we're Steel types, but I like to go with Lucario using a Fighting Gem boosted close combat so that nothing takes any damage. It's an easy one-hit KO, and now it's time to take on the big bad Ghetsis himself. I'm forced to lead off with Lucario in this fight as well, so I make the pivot out into Skarmory as I resist everything Ghetsis' Cofagrigus does. After throwing off a Toxic, I'm forced to roost a ton in order to stay out of crit Shadow Ball range, as Skarm's Spadef isn't great. I am able to get up a spike in this long drawn out process, which is definitely great. Eventually, after plenty of roost stalling and some heals from Ghetsis, I make the pivot out into Bisharp as I see it as the perfect opportunity to set up a Swords Dance. As I switch in, I actually get Spadef dropped on the Shadow Ball, which would usually suck, but due to Defiant, an ability that gives Bisharp a +2 in attack whenever one of its stats are dropped, we basically get what's a free Swords Dance. I then set up another SD and take out the Cofagrigus with a Night Slash. Next up is Seismitoad, which easily goes down to a +4 Night Slash. Toxicroak is next, and it gets blown away by a +4 Iron Head. Now at this point I'm feeling good. A little too good in fact. I got, as the kids say, lost in the sauce. Drapion comes in next, and thinking I have an easy sweep, I stay in an Iron Head, completely forgetting that not only is Drapion faster than Bisharp, but it also has Earthquake. I get outsped, and crit, so down goes Bisharp. I don't know if the crit mattered, but regardless, I never should have risked it and just gone into my very free Skarmory. Lost in the sauce. Next up, I go into Drill after taking an EQ, and take out the Drapion with my own. Next up is a Flamethrowering Electros. After pivoting Aggron to take the Flamethrower, I go hard Magnezone to chew a baited Thunderbolt. I then protect and throw off a big Toxic to wear this thing down. Unfortunately, the next Flamethrower does burn me, but we still chew and get off one more Protect before pivoting back into Aggron. After one more Protect from Aggron, I decide it's in my best interest to go Lucario, as I can take anything but a crit, and then take it out with a close combat. Lastly is Hydreigon, which we thankfully outspeed and KO with CC. Huge battle won, but we lost Bisharp, making Chantal a bit harder in the Elite Four. On our way, we get our last and arguably best encounter in Metang, and eventual Metagross. I'm absolutely stoked. For those of you who don't know, Metagross is actually my second favorite Pokemon behind only Salamence. Can you guess what my first gen of Pokemon was? I Master Ball it, then head through the Victory Road, which was pretty uneventful besides a couple of mandatory fights against Ace Trainers with a Stalk and Throw respectively. All that's left is one more Hugh battle. This fight goes pretty smoothly. I lead a Lumberry Lucario as Hugh swaggers my Lucario with his Unpheasant after I Swords Dance. Thanks to our berry, we shake off the confusion and are sitting at a sweet +4 attack. From there, we OHKO every single one member of his team. I take some preparations before the Elite Four and grabbing some TMs and items, and then head right on in. I decide to do what any sane person would do, and I take on the Elite Four in easiest to hardest. The first two particularly being very easy. Grimsley is a Dark-type master, so it's time for everybody's favorite program, the Lucario Show. I basically lead off, click Swords Dance, and then close combat everything. I wish there was more to it, but that's literally it. First battle down. Next up is Caitlyn, the Psychic-type master, and man oh man am I missing Bisharp right now. Thankfully, Excadrill is here to pick up the slack. I lead off with it and click Swords Dance as Musharna clicks Yawn. Thankfully, I'm Lumberry, so I set up another Swords Dance, knowing I'll wake up right away. Unfortunately, Musharna goes for a Reflect this turn, allowing it to live a Shadow Claw and get off yet another Yawn. This is pretty annoying, but I realize Musharna can't really do much to me, so I set up once again as I go to sleep. I burn a few sleep turns and then wake up and KO with a Shadow Claw. From here, I can Earthquake and Shadow Claw everything, cruising along to an easy victory. Halfway done. Remember when I said I missed Bisharp? Yeah, it's Chantal time. Excadrill is once again here to pick up the slack. I Swords Dance in Cofagrigus face twice, and then OHKO it with an Earthquake. Next up is Chandelure, which I'm a bit worried about it outspeeding me, but thankfully, we are faster and we take it out with an Earthquake. From here on out, it's just Earthquakes and Shadow Claws once again, onto the third victory of the Elite Four. Last up is Marshall, which will likely be our toughest Elite Four fight. He's a fighting type master, and in case you didn't know, Steels don't necessarily appreciate fighting types. Metagross and Skarmory are going to have to absolutely carry this battle. I lead off with Metagross against his throw and just barely miss out on a KO with Zen Headbutt. Thankfully, I get a flinch, and knowing I can force a heal, I Meteor Mash the next turn to try and bait an attack boost. I don't get it, but we can take out the throw the next turn. Next up is Mienshao, and I protect assuming a high jump kick will come out, but he actually bounces for some reason. He of course paralyzes me the next turn as he comes down, but I can take him out with a Zen Headbutt right after. Next up is Concelder, and not wanting to allow free setup, I Zen Headbutt as it bolts up to +1/+1. Oh god, this is terrifying. I Zen once more, but after being brought way too low by a Hammer Arm, I'm forced to pivot out. I go Skarmory, and after taking a ridiculous amount from a +1 Hammer Arm, I take it out with my Rocky Helmet. We're not out of the woods just yet though, as Sock comes out. I don't have a switch into this thing, so I'm basically forced to hope and pray I chew one Brick Break, as I do on just 3 HP and get a huge Roost off. Insanely close. From here, we spam Roost and eventually take out the Sock with an Iron Head. Finale time. Regardless of whether or not we beat Iris, it's all over after this fight. We actually made it all the way through the Elite Four and all the way up to the Champion without losing a single Pokemon, which allows us to play pretty recklessly in this fight. I lead off with Lucario, and he keeps his reputation as the Hydreigon Slayer, taking out Irises with a close combat. Next up is Drapion, and I really have zero switch-ins to a Life Orb, Sheer Force, Focus Blast, so it's time for the Lucario show to finally come to a close. I close combat one final time, and we go down to a Focus Blast. Rest easy, Cobalt, you absolutely carried this run. I can then go into Drill and pick it off with an Iron Head. Next up, Iris goes Aggron for God knows why, so I can take it out with an Earthquake. Next up is Haxorus, which Skarmory hardballs, so I switch into it and wear it down with Rocky Helmet plus Toxic. Next up, Lapras comes out and I Toxic it with Skarmory, as it served its purpose. After Roostalling with our last 2 Roost PP and getting off an Iron Head, Skarm goes down. I then go into Magnezone and protect as Lapras goes down to a Toxic. Iris' last Pokemon is Archeops, which we dodge a Rock Slide from and absolutely blow away with a Discharge. We did it. We beat a Pokemon Black 2 hardcore Nuzlocke using only Steel types. I had a ton of fun this run. Steel types are pretty insane. If you guys made it this far into the video, I'm sure you subbed, but if you haven't, I would really appreciate it if you did. It helps me a ton. As does liking the video and following me on Twitch. I should be in the middle of attempting a Radical Red hardcore Nuzlocke over there right now, so come check it out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.